Hello and welcome to this session on Sketchbook Pro. Sorry that I can't be with you today, but hopefully Nick is there, able to give some advice and support and get you started on Sketchbook Pro. Okay, so hopefully you've got some design ideas and you've got an idea of which brief you're going to tackle and where you're going to go with this project. Today what we're going to be focusing on is digital sketching and rendering, and we're going to create we're going to look at an exercise which will teach you the basics of Sketchbook Pro and how we can move into digital sketching and rendering. A lot of the fundamentals of sketching and rendering are the same as when we do it physically, okay, which is why last week I wanted you to get some design ideas down by hand on paper, because a lot of the principles are the same when we're moving across to Sketchbook. Okay, so hopefully in front of a Wacom screen. At some point, make sure you turn your computer on, and I'll tell you how to load up the software in a bit. But just for now, I just want to introduce Sketchbook Pro. Okay, so really today what we're going to be looking at is we're going to be understanding how we use Sketchbook Pro from the basics, and then we're going to go on a little bit to look at maybe how we can enhance some of our physical sketches. We'll touch more on this next week when we look at Photoshop, but how we can touch up the physical sketches that we've already done. Okay, so what is Sketchbook Pro? Well, Sketchbook Pro is as I've said, basically digital rendering and drawing, and we use the Wacoms that you've got in front of you. And what I want you to create for this project, for this assignment, is a page, maybe not too dissimilar for this, for the product that you wanted to design. So maybe a few different concepts, but probably kind of all centered around a similar core idea of a product. And we can mix in 2D and 3D drawings. Today we're going to focus on 2D, and in a couple of weeks we're going to kind of move into 3D, because it's a little bit more complex in Sketchbook Pro. Not massively, but a little bit more complex. So what we want to be able to do is create your sketches so they look something like this, and then you can arrange and manipulate them on a page so that it's interesting and compelling. The great thing about Sketchbook Pro is that you can just really bring your drawings to life. Okay, we can take scanned in drawings, or we can draw straight on the screen, and here we can just apply a little bit of effectively marker rendering to our drawings, and it just lifts them off that page. So here's just a few examples of product designers that have used Sketchbook Pro in their design and development. Okay, and here again, this is the sort of thing that I'm looking for in this assignment, where we've got a compilation of images that utilize the digital tools to show, I guess, either how your product has been developed or your kind of, I guess, final idea, and just tweaking the development of your final idea. As you can see with this one, not 100% sure what it is. It's obviously some sort of laptop case or laptop something. They're all very similar. Okay, the design is pretty much set on a clear design direction, and they're now just tweaking about in terms of the form of the casing. And this is really what I want you to be able to produce. Okay, you guys might remember from last year, looking at for my product design students, when we drew stationary items last year. These are stationary items drawn in Sketchbook Pro, and Sketchbook Pro has a number of tools to help you get your perspective right, to get your line quality right, and to apply simple shading and rendering. So if you're struggling with perspective and you're struggling to understand form in 3D maybe a little bit, Sketchbook can really help you with some of its built-in tools. I'm just going to flick through a few more images of stuff that's on Sketchbook Pro, and you can probably see the enhanced quality that this gives you over just drawing by hand. So here again, we've got this sort of camera type thing, and you can see a few kind of developments of that, and you've got the final kind of rendered version in the middle, which just looks cool, doesn't it? But one thing I would like us all to think about is really light and shadow, and where does light and shadow fall? Because that is really fundamental. Picking up highlights, picking up split lines, looking for where reflections might be. These are the sorts of things that would make your drawing look realistic, and you'll bring it to life. And also, we just need to remember that although we're digitally sketching, we're going to be using all of the same tools and techniques that we've learnt before in terms of perspective, crating, dividing up those crates to enable us to get the right perspective and the right angle on our products. Okay, so it is basically a digital version of sketching. Okay, and again, looking at images like this, light and shadow, highlights and reflections, and here textured surfaces make a real difference. And today I'm going to show you how to import some textures onto your drawings, and then you can shade and render over them to give highlight and shadow on that. And that's going to be really, again, just lifts that off the page and brings that to life. And I always use these as references. These are like very mundane kettles, okay, and they're just from, I don't know, like Argos or something like that, the website. But use products around you, use images online as a reference to where light and shadow should fall. Okay, look at the highlights. If we look at this spout of this Russell Hobbs kettle on the right, my right hand side, what you'll notice is that it's I get a kind of chrome-like effect, but just look at the way the light and the shadow fall, okay? And when we sketch and when we render, we want to basically just copy this. We want to imitate what happens in real life, and that will make our products look more believable, okay? So use everything around you as references. So if you've got a really complex curve, a really complex surface that you're like, oh, or a button, and you're like, oh, I don't know what the light or the shadow will do in that area, what the reflection would be, depending on the material that I've chosen. To get your renderings, to get your Sketchbook Pro renderings looking good, just find an image that has a very similar surface that you want to use, and then effectively use that as your reference and copy the same principles of where those highlights and shadows should be. Okay, so some just classic images like anything with a screen or this highly reflective surface like iPhones, they always have that kind of slash divide of a shadow. You've got this really light area and this really dark area, and it's really clearly divided. Use all of this to reference when you're creating your drawings. Okay, and what we're going to do next week is we're going to be looking at bringing in your hand sketches that you've done hopefully last week and maybe this week. We're going to mix those with some Sketchbook Pro sketches. We're going to put them into Photoshop and we're going to enhance them. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to take a load of drawings, mash them together, and arrange them in a really exciting and compelling way. Funnily, we might look at this and think, actually, if we study these drawings that I've just shown you on the screen now, they are kind of pretty mediocre. There's nothing particularly special. Actually, some of the perspective in them is pretty poor, pretty out. Some of the lines are a bit wobbly. But the way it's been combined, the way they've been condensed, the way they've been selected and the background has been chosen and the highlight colours brought through, actually, at a glance, it looks really nice and really impressive. And it's these sort of subtle tricks that I want you to develop through this portfolio project that we're doing, which actually will help your design portfolios when we move forward. So that's where we're going to be going. Now, I'd like you all to load up Sketchbook Pro if you haven't already. Sketchbook Pro can be found in the Aston Cloud apps. If it doesn't open there, if it's got any problems, then it's an Autodesk piece of software. So open up Autodesk, the whole suite. So I think there's Alias Autodesk or something like that, and there's a whole suite of software. And if you open up the whole suite of software, it will end up in the Start menu, and you'll be able to find it. If the actual Sketchbook Pro link doesn't work, sometimes it doesn't work, but that should work. Okay, so all load up Sketchbook Pro, and then I'll give you a demo. Okay. Oh, finally, just to make a mention, I'm going to give you a kind of a quick tutorial on everything, and we can work through an exercise. But there's loads of resources online, and don't just rely on what I'm telling you. Do check out the resources. Autodesk's resources, and there's loads of good stuff there that you can use to help you. Okay, right, let's just pause for that second and get everybody up and running. Okay, great. When you open up Sketchbook Pro, it should look something like this. Okay, I'm just going to give you a brief run through. Okay, so on your left hand side you have got your tools. So you've got your pen, your pencil, your airbrush, your chisel tip brush, your paintbrush, etc, etc. And basically you can just click one of those tools and you can start drawing. That's actually very, very faint, so I'll try something that we can actually see. And you can start drawing on the screen. Okay, so really quite basic, quite simple. We've got a couple of colour wheels here. We can just pick our colour and we can immediately just change that colour and we can use that. Okay, you'll notice that each of them have different effects. The airbrush is like an airbrush, it's quite big and fat and chunky. We've got a chisel tip brush, etc, and so on. Okay, so really quite straightforward. Change the colours. At the top here, this little oh, it's not opening for me, is our brush properties, which I'm just going to see where that's gone. Okay, sorry for that. I just had to reboot my software because my brush properties wasn't loading. I'll just click that again, by the way. So the brush properties just above that brush, click on that, and then you can get your the size of your brush, the hardness, and the opacity there, how visible you want that to be. Okay, so you can go and click and change that, and then you can draw different. What you will notice is it is pressure sensitive, so I'm drawing really faintly and now I'm drawing really hard, pressing down on my stylus quite hard, so you can change things like that. Okay, so at the top, so the brushes are all pretty self-explanatory. The rubbers on your stylus that you've got at the moment, if you flip it over, that acts as a rubber and you can pick up the rubber immediately and start rubbing stuff out. Again, it's pretty straightforward, pretty obvious. There. Okay, right, so along your top bar, you've got forward and backwards. Again, pretty straightforward. You've got crop and you've got transform controls and stuff. I'll kind of cover some of those a little bit later. But the ones you will actually be using quite a lot is the ruler and the ellipses. Okay, so the ruler is really useful. Okay, so you grab a ruler. And you set it to whatever angle you want by picking up those two dots and spinning that around. Okay, so annoyingly you can't just set it vertical, horizontal, but you can. It's pretty easy to do when you just drag it over to 0. Okay, and then whatever you draw will only be along that ruler's edge. Okay, so I'm going to draw something else here. A couple of vertical lines or whatever. Okay, so rulers are really useful, really handy. Close that. And then the ellipse tool. The ellipse tool is really handy as well. So grab the ellipse. Again, you will only draw what's in that ellipse. And on the right hand side, you can twist that around. You can make it bigger or smaller, and you can make it fatter. And you can use that any place you like. Okay, really, really good. French curves, again, kind of classic old school French curves. Get a nice kind of curve if you want. You can pick up a kind of an interesting sweep. You can rotate that around and you can make it bigger or smaller. Okay, so hopefully those are pretty obvious tools, pretty self-explanatory. And I think we could all find those pretty immediately. Okay. One thing to note when looking at Sketchbook Pro is that we work in layers. Okay, so just like Photoshop, and if anybody uses Photoshop, you will recognize the layers. But what we've got here is we've got a layers icon. And if I click on that layers icon, it will bring up my layers. Okay, and what you'll notice is that we've got a background layer which is fixed, and everything we are drawing on at the moment, I'm drawing here, is on layer 1. And each layer is transparent apart from the marks that we make on the page with our stylus. So to add a new layer, there's a little plus button there, we can add a new layer. Okay, it's highlighted blue, so now anything I draw will be on layer 2. So hopefully you can see it just faintly comes up there. Okay, and there's a little eye next to that layer, and you can turn it off, so you can hide it, or you can show it. And we're going to be using these quite a lot later. Okay, so layers are really important. And then on the right hand side we've got the opacity of each layer, so we can make them faint or we can make them more visible. We can turn the layers on and off, okay, so as we go through the project. We can also reorder them. There's a little up and down thing if you want to change the position of them. Now I'll show you that now because, as you can see, my page was getting pretty cluttered with just rubbish. I was just showing you how to use stuff. Okay, so what you can do is, instead of having to get the rubber and try and rub out every bit, just go to your layers, turn that layer off, hide it, or even delete that layer if you want to. So a quick tool, quick shortcut of how to do stuff. Would take your stylus, click and hold on layer 1, and you'll get a load of tools that come up around your stylus. Okay, and basically I'm holding down. I haven't taken my pen off the screen. I'm holding down. I'm just rotating around to show you, and you can go to delete layer, that red cross, click delete layer, and that gets rid of it. Saves you having to rub everything out. On layer 2, you'll notice that I can't delete it because it's the only layer that I've got. Okay, so I could add another layer and then I could click and delete layer 2. Layer 3 is a nice clean layer. Okay, so just play around with your layers and just be aware that Sketchbook Pro works with layers. I'm running through loads of stuff. I'm going to run through it pretty quickly because hopefully it's pretty self-explanatory, and just kind of have a little play in a minute. Okay, so we've got rulers, we've got ellipses. The next one along, I'm going to cover perspective guides later. I'm going to just jump onto symmetry. Okay, so we've got symmetry here. Symmetry creates a line down the middle of your page, or you can turn it to a horizontal line or multiple lines, and basically it just means that anything you draw is mirrored across that line of symmetry. And again, you can change that to be a horizontal or something, so you can kind of create some weird and crazy patterns if you want to, but that might be really useful if you're trying to draw a symmetrical product, as hopefully you can imagine. Okay, so that's symmetry. Have a play with that one. I'm just going to make a new layer and get rid of all of that, because I don't really want that. A couple more things to kind of talk about over here. Next one is steady stroke. Now steady stroke's quite good. So if you're kind of doing something a bit crazy, steady stroke just enables you to, when you're drawing, it gives you a little red line, which basically means you can just slow everything down. You can go really slowly. I know normally we talk when we're doing line work to go quite quickly, but what you'll see is the stroke is just a little bit off your stylus. Okay, and that just means you can slow everything down and it will make it all a little bit more steady. Okay, the next one, which I was almost jumping ahead with in that one, is this tool which makes your circles turn more elliptical, predictive stroke. So if I'm drawing an ellipse like that, maybe it needs to be a bit better than that, ellipse like that, it will straighten it up for you. Okay, so you can see the tolerance that it works within. There's a little tolerance in there, but basically ellipses that are almost there but a bit off, it will tidy up for you. So that's really good as well. If you, instead of having to get the ellipse tool out every single time, if you're just like, oh, I know I need a little ellipse in here somewhere, that's obviously too rough, you can get it to straighten up for you quite quickly. So that's really useful. Okay, just hide that layer. Next one, we've got some shapes. Pretty obvious. We can just draw. We can draw some shapes. Make sure you're clicked on the correct layer, by the way. So make sure your layer is blue, otherwise it won't let you draw on it. We can draw some pretty basic shapes if we want to. There. Okay. So those are the kind of the core tools. the final thing that we've got is colours. So I told you that you can change a colour using the colour wheel on this hand side. But we've also got a library of colours over here, which is really useful. So we can pick up any particular shade of colour, and these are actually pretty decent colours. So to save you having to go through the colour wheel and faff around to find the exact marker shade that you want, you can pick up kind of actual markers and use those. I could go into a marker pen and actually start rendering in a particular marker shade that I want. So I would recommend having a look at that, because that's really useful to use for your colours. Okay, so in a very quick snapshot, those are the kind of the core elements of Sketchbook Pro. I will talk about selections when we go through the exercise and transformations and how we do stuff like that. But for now, what I want you to do, we're just going to pause this video in a second, is I want you just to have a play, make some layers, draw some stuff, make sure you're familiar with all of the things that I've just run through. I've run through them pretty quickly, but hopefully a lot of them are pretty obvious for you. Okay, so have a go at that, and I put up my pause video. Okay, so what are we going to do today? What I want us to do today is to use all of the tools that I've just covered, and a few more, and we're going to be looking at creating a camera, so a 2D camera. Now, what I'm going to do is we're going to start with a basic camera form and a camera shape, and I'm going to show you how to create that. But then actually what we're going to do is we're going to make them a little bit more interesting than this, and we're going to put in a proper lens, and we can put in some textures and materials as well to make it look really interesting. Okay, so it doesn't matter what the form or the shape of this camera is. I want us to have a little bit of fun, and basically learn how to use the Sketchbook Pro tools, okay, and apply all of this to your products. Okay, so go away outside of this class and take the products that you've designed, let's get them into 2D, let's get them rendered up, and let's get them looking good for next week. We'll cover 3D in a couple of weeks' time, actually, properly. Okay, so that's what we're going to do. Okay, right, so starting with a blank sheet of paper, which is great. Right, so, oh, what I forgot to say, one thing I did forget to mention, is about moving around and zooming in. So to move around and zoom in, hold down the space bar, and then you'll get a zoom, a magnifying glass, and some little arrows, and you can zoom in and move around using that. Okay, so that's just how you do that. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to get our ruler, and we're going to start by drawing the horizontal and vertical lines. Okay, so get a nice pencil. Oh, sorry, I'm still working blue. I'm just going to change that. I'm going to work in black for now. Okay, right, so what we intentionally want to do is we want to try and fade it out. And if it doesn't look particularly faded out, don't worry. What we're going to do is we're going to do, we can use our rubber a bit later. Okay, make sure you get those angles on 0. Okay, so what we're just going to do is simply get a nice top and bottom to our camera form. Okay, I just missed it slightly on this one. What you'll notice is that this is nothing like CAD. Okay, so if you mess up a line, you're going to have to sort it out. You're going to have to redraw it, or just use the backspace. Okay, so something like that. That looks good for my my outer shell. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to get my ellipse, and I'm going to drag my ellipse to the corner. Okay, and I'm going to make this ellipse as circular as possible. But to be honest, I'm not actually too concerned exactly what the numbers are. If I'm completely honest, as long as it looks roughly circular, that will do for me. Okay, there we go. So what I've done is I've taken my ellipse, I've made it roughly a circle, I've taken it to the corners, and I'm just going to trace off those kind of corner arcs. And obviously just decide on the radius you want that to be. Try and be as accurate as possible. The one I just did there was slightly out. I might just Control Z, undo that, and do that one again. Sorry, I'm actually working on a laptop, so it's slightly harder to use than your Wacom tablets. Okay. There we go. So I've got some nice corner radii that I've stuck in there. Okay, so let's just all get that base form ready. Cool. Okay. Right, what I might now do is I might grab a soft rubberer, and I'm just going to rub very gently. Just check my brush properties. Amount raised is 100%. I might just make it a little bit smaller. And I'm just going to go over very gently so that I can kind of fade those lines out. I don't mind having a little bit of line because it looks quite a little bit artistic, a little bit stylistic, but I don't want them to dominate. Okay, I do want to know where the edge of my product is. Okay, so I'm just going to rub out some of those lines, just subtly, something like that. Okay, now what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to move on to another layer, because I'm going to use this layer 8 as it is as my base layer, and I might put some different tones and different shades on the layers above it. Okay, so that's great. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to get an ellipse, and this is going to be my lens. So again, have a bit of fun. I'm not prescribing anything. You could have a massive lens that kind of bulges out the side of the camera. You could have a really small lens. You could have multiple lenses like current phones do and stuff like that. I don't really mind. And again, a lot of this is by eye. I'm not really measuring anything. I'm just working out, thinking what looks about right. Okay, I'm going to go for a massive lens, and I'm going to it's going to spill over the edges slightly. Okay, oops, I'm still on the rubber, sorry. Go back to my pen, and I'm going to put in my lens. Now what I'm going to do is just get a tiny bit smaller, keeping my ellipse exactly where it is, just because I want to put the rim in now. Okay, so I'm going to just put the rim of that lens in, and I make it even smaller, and I'm going to put another line in, something like that. And in a minute we're going to add some tone and some shade into those different lines that I've just put in. Okay, so there we go. That's kind of where my lens is going to sit. It's going to bulge out of this camera. It's going to look quite interesting. Next thing I want is I want maybe a bit of a crosshair. I think that it looks quite cool when you put a bit of a crosshair in the middle of a lens. So I'm going to, because I'm working on the lens at the moment, I'm going to make a new layer. Oops, and I'm going to grab my line tool. And again, I'm actually just going to do this completely by eye. You could try and measure it and sort it out. I think that should be quite difficult. A lot of this is just by eye. It should be quick. It should be rapid. I don't want you spending hours and hours and hours working on it, but it should look about right. So if it does look wrong, if it does look out of position, then please do change it. Okay, so my new layer, I'm going to put some crosshairs on it. I'm going to get my rubber now and make that a bit bigger. And I'm just going to rub out slightly on those crosshairs, so just in the middle, just fade that out, fade those edges out just a little bit, just so that we know it's there, but it's not dominating. Okay. Okay, cool. So we've got the kind of the basic body, we've got the lens, we've got a bit of kind of this kind of crosshairs which we're going to use to kind of reference where everything's positioned. What next? Well, I think what we could probably have is a little bit of depth to this product. It's very flat at the moment. So I'm going to create another layer, and this layer is going to be, I guess it's going to be a kind of a bevel on the edge. Okay, so I'm going to grab my line tool, and I'm going to set it in probably about here. Make sure I go back onto my pen. About here, yeah, to about there. Again, I'm just kind of making this up, and I do kind of want you guys to do this, is just to kind of experiment and feel free to experiment. Yeah, I think I'm gonna kind of come here, right? Oh, maybe a little bit higher. Sorry, and put a line in there. Okay, right. I'm gonna get my ellipses in now. I'm gonna put some ellipses in these corners. You'll notice this time I didn't quite go to the edge. I kind of thought there's not much point going right to the edge when I know I'm going to put a nice kind of little radius in the edge in the corner. So I'm just going to stick these in. Okay, that'll do. Okay, that's maybe a little bit rough. I could maybe tidy that up a little bit, but that'll do for now. Okay, you notice I'm doing this on another layer, so I'm using layers, I'm building up things, and I'm going to start to rub away bits in a minute. The next thing I might want to put in is a bit of a flash or something like that. So again, on another layer, I'm just going to go up, next layer. What I'm going to do is I'm going to get my ruler and I'm going to draw a flash coming out here, and I'm not quite sure how I'm going to end it. Maybe I will use... Could I use an interesting shape? Maybe I will actually. Maybe I'll use that shape there. Okay, so I've just grabbed my oops. There. Okay, so that's going to be my flash. Okay, I might put in a little circle in the middle there as well. Okay, maybe it's going to look a little bit odd. I'm not quite sure what it's actually going to look like. Okay, actually, sorry, my circle is getting a little bit too small. So I'll just make that a little bit bigger. I'm actually going to ignore that line I have just drawn. And I'm actually going to go and make a bigger circle here, and this will be my flash. Okay, if I can pick that up. Okay, there we go. So I've just stuck that flash on the end there. I'm going to tidy this up. Layer 12 is a little bit messy. I might tidy that one up in a bit. But basically what I want is a big lens, sticking out flash, and I'm going to put some kind of textures and different materials on that raised surface. Okay, so get to a point where you're kind of happy. Experiment putting a few different things on the front of your camera, and we'll just pause the video for a second. So just as a reminder, I'll just pause the video at this point, but have a look at these examples. You can maybe copy some of them or use them as inspiration, but get your basic form of your camera right. Okay, once we're happy with the camera that we've designed, what we're going to now start to do is start to apply some shading and some tones and different effects to it. Okay, so the first thing, again, I'm going to create a new layer, and what you'll notice is I'm building up loads and loads of layers. That's just so I can use them again later. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add a base grey to probably this midsection here. So to do that, I'm going to go to my select, and I'm just going to select a box. Okay, so I haven't really covered select yet, but basically I can select. You go to select, draw a box, and that will make my selection. Actually, I might just run this all the way off the edge. I'm going to run this straight off the edge. Okay. So now I can only draw or apply color or anything inside this box. You notice I haven't actually done it particularly well on the top edge, so I might just do that again. So Control D is deselect. If I want to try that again, I can just make that a little bit neater. Don't worry about the corners. I'm not too concerned about the corners at the moment. I'll just use a rubber to tidy those up later. Okay, so I'm going to go to my markers. I'm going to pick a nice grey. I'm going to pick maybe a C3, and I can just use the paint bucket, fill bucket here to add in my C3 grey. Okay, so and Control D to deselect that. Now, as you will notice, this has just wiped out everything in front of it. So it's in front of everything. So layer 13, click on my layers, and I'm going to move that right the way down to the bottom. Okay, so everything else is coming over the top of it. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to get my rubber, and I'm just going to maybe go to brush properties, make it a little bit smaller, and I'm just going to, is that the way? I'm just going to tidy up those edges. Okay. So just nice and neatly tidy up those edges with my rubber. Okay. Something like that. That will do. Okay, that's quite nice. I might actually look at that and think maybe it's a fraction dark. Maybe I should have made that a little bit lighter. That's fine. On my layer, the opacity, I'm just going to knock that down a bit. I think maybe actually I should have made it a bit lighter. So I'm going to go for kind of, what's that, just about, probably about 60% or something like that. I'm going to go with that. Okay. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to look at where I might have some shadow. Okay. And I expect I'm going to have some shadow. I expect this area here will be highlighted at the top, but I'll have some quite dark shadow down the bottom. So what am I going to do? Well, I'm going to create a new layer, as I always do. And I'm going to go to my selection. Okay, and there's loads of different selection types that you can choose. Now what I'm going to do this time is a polyline. So I'm going to pick a polyline, and basically you'll see what that is. You can just draw kind of any shape. So I'm going to kind of draw roughly here, over, where am I going? I kind of come around here, I think, actually. Along this base here, something like that, there. Okay, double click to finish. So what I want is that area to be in a bit of a darker shadow. Okay, have a play with things like polyline and all of that. It's pretty intuitive, and hopefully most people pick it up pretty quickly. I mean, it is almost like paint, really. But that's the area that I want. I'm going to pick a bit of a darker colour, C5, just blitz that out in a C5, Control D to deselect, and again I'm just going to get my rubber, and I'm just going to tidy up those corners, those edges. I'm doing this maybe a little bit quickly, so oh, I haven't tidied up the other side, but that's fine, I can come back and do that later. There we go, tidy up your edges. Tidy up this baseline as well. Okay, here's a nice little tip. If you want to get a straight line, because I didn't do my selection particularly well, that's fine. Get a ruler, use your ruler as your straight line. I noticed that I was actually, one of my lines is slightly out. Okay, so use that ruler as a straight line, use that with your rubber, go along until you take off exactly what you want. So something like that, and you get that nice straight edge. Okay, so I'm going to put a bit of highlight and shadow all around. So have a go, get your base colours down, get that dark shadow on the bottom. Okay, cool. The next thing I'm going to focus on is the lens. Okay, so again, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my selection, get a nice oval, and we're going to draw, oops. So draw that. It goes roughly from the centre, so I can take my centre line that I've already made, and I'm going to make that just a bit bigger to match what I need. Okay, something like that. That looks about right. Okay, so I forgot to say, let's make a new layer. So let's make a new layer, and I've got my lens. What I'm going to do this time is actually I'm just going to try something different, and let's use the airbrush this time. Okay, so on my new layer I'm going to start airbrushing in this area here. Okay, and we need to think again about our light and our shadow. So if we think that our light source is coming from this top corner over here, it's probably going to be a lot darker down this bottom area here. So what I might do is I might grab in maybe a C8 or something. I might go quite dark in this bottom corner here with my highlights, and then I'm going to maybe go in for a C1, really light up in that top corner there. Okay, so I really want to get this nice contrast between that light and that dark. Okay, so just like you would do with manual sketching, manual rendering, just play around to get that nice gradiented effect. Okay. Now, what we're actually going to do later in a minute is we're going to get a lens, and I'm going to stick in an image of a lens in the middle. So we're not going to worry too much about getting it perfect, because we're actually only going to keep the edge element. Okay, so I'm going to do that for that one. Control D, deselect. I think I might just do the same for the flash area as well, actually. So I'm just going to get my, my oval tool in the middle there. It is a little bit fiddly, and it just does take a little bit of time just to get used to. Add a new layer, as always. Airbrush, see, oops. Don't want to move it, I want to go back onto my airbrush. I'm just going to add a little bit of shadow on this side. My airbrush might be a bit big actually, so I might bring the size of my airbrush right down and just add in a little bit of shadow. Maybe that's a bit too small. Make that a little bit bigger. So it's about trial and error, playing around, seeing how that works. There we go, something like that. That will do for now. Control D. Okay, so you can see I'm really trying to lift this off the page. Now, the final thing before I go into kind of some interesting materials and textures is the white looks okay, but it would be nicer if it was kind of maybe a very pale grey. And what I might actually do is turn the whole page a pale grey to start using that for my background for my whole page. So in my layers on the right hand side, I'm going to go down and add a new layer, which I'm just going to move to the bottom. There we go. And on that new layer, go to my fill bucket, pick maybe a C1, and let's just fill everything with that colour, something like that. And I've just taken that white out of the whole page. But what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to go in with a rubber and just add in a few highlights along some of these top edges. So what I might do is I might get my ruler, bring it up here, and put a bit of a high. Oops, just Control Z that, made it move a fraction higher, and put a little bit of a highlight line on that top edge. So you see what I'm doing is I'm just kind of going backwards and forwards. Playing around to get it looking just right. Okay, so something like that. I'm just going to freehand that bit in here. Oops, that's a bit wobbly. But again, you can always just freehand stuff if you want to. That was a little bit wobbly. I think I'll go and put an ellipse in there. I'm just going to pause this, let you play around and get a decent image like this. Okay, just spend this time while we're paused to just touch up your images. Okay, so I'll just escape that. Okay, so work through each of those layers. So I'm on layer 12 now, and I've just touched up that area there. So you can also touch up layer 11. Which one was that? You can turn off and on the layers to see which ones they are. Okay, so layer 8, I might just touch up. I've got that little overhanging line, so just going to get a rubber in there and get rid of that overhanging line there. Layer 10, I think I've got another bit of an overhanging line. Oh, that's my. So again, just go through layer 11. That looks a bit messy, so I'm just going to go and touch up my layers. Okay, so go around, just neatly touch stuff up. Some things you can leave, but some things just look a little bit kind of untidy and unfinished. Okay, so just go around and touch up anything that needs touching up. Okay, so I've spent just a little bit of time touching things up and rubbing out areas where they've got layers over intersecting each other and stuff like that. Okay, so next thing I might want to do, I might want to add a little bit of kind of cross-hatching in actually to add a bit of shadow. That might look quite good. So what I can do is just going to grab a pencil, grab my ruler, go for a kind of 45 degrees or roughly that. That'll do. Actually, I shouldn't because my shadow line was not 45 degrees. New layer, pencil. Let's put in a cross bit of kind of hatching. So again, try and get nice and even spacing. Okay, something like that. And just going with the rubber, rub out the bits we don't need. Just quite a lot of it, but that's fine. Okay, so hopefully what you'll see with Sketchbook Pro is there we go. It's all about kind of trialing and error and trying to see what works. Great, okay. So, as a kind of initial concept sketch, we're kind of getting there, aren't we? We've kind of got a basic form, we can see kind of roughly what the product would actually look like in real life, but what would make it really interesting now is to look at the different material finishes and surfaces and textures. So that's what I'm going to be doing next. Okay. So, a camera lens. The best and easiest place to go is just to go to Google, type in camera lenses, and see what we can find. Now we're looking for an image which is front on, so effectively in 2D, which has a nice lens. Maybe not something like this, because this looks a little bit kind of too unrealistic. But maybe that one's quite good actually. Let's go for this one here. It's a nice big image, nice realistic camera lens front on, it's got nice reflection. I think that would work perfectly. So what I'm just going to do is I'm going to copy that image and go back to Sketchbook Pro and just paste it in. Okay, so this automatically appears on its own layer, which is really helpful, and there is a little scale icon next to it here. Okay, so I can scale it and I can move it around. Now, to see exactly where we're going to move it, I'm just going to knock the opacity of my layer down so I can see where it is. Oops, on the rubber. So go up here and click on the Quick Transform Move tool, which will enable us to hopefully move our image around. Okay. If you're struggling to see, just make sure you knock that opacity down. And then what we can do is we can move it into position. Now, I don't want any of the exterior, I just want that central lens, okay? So what I'm just going to do is move it roughly into position. It may be a little bit fiddly. Scale it up just a little bit, something like that. Yeah, that looks about right to me, somewhere like that. Okay, that's great. Go to my selection tool, selection again from the center of that lens, and I am going to take it out to there. That'll do. Okay, that'll do. Right, now, what I've done, copied and pasted an image in, changed the opacity a little bit, okay, lined up my selection, roughly, pretty much. There we go, that's better. Okay, and now, what I've got here is I've got some options. Okay, oops, my selection's just gone over there. Okay, now, at the moment, if I hit the delete key, it will delete the middle of my lens. Okay, Control Z undo. What I want to do is I want to delete everything else except that lens. So on the top in my selection, I've got invert selection here. So if I click on that, now if I hit delete, everything else will go except my lens, and I can Control D to deselect. Okay, so you can see how powerful this is, because now I can start adding in elements into my drawings. So I might say, well, actually, I definitely wouldn't want this at full opacity because that looks a bit weird. But taking it down to say 50% or maybe like 30-40%, something like that, actually kind of looks about all right. Okay, so what I want you to do is get some images, get a lens or whatever it is, stick it in your drawing, knock down the opacity and crop it to make it fit. Okay, cool. The next thing I want to do is I actually would quite like to make this a bit textured, this surface here, instead of just having it plain. So, textures are really in, kind of fabrics are really in. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to Google, and I'm just going to Google, you probably noticed I quite like grey, so I'm going to go for some grey fabric texture. That's what I'm going to Google, and you'll see there's loads of textures that we can use. Okay, so pick one that you like, that you think would fit with your product. Could be that one. I'm just going to go for that one for now, just for ease. So again, right click, copy that image, get back to Sketchbook Pro, Control V, paste that image. This time, actually, it doesn't really matter where it is now, but we do want to make sure it looks about right. I'm actually just going to rotate this one around because I think the weave or the grain looks better going in this direction. Okay. And again, I'm going to knock down the opacity quite considerably. Something like that. What I'm actually going to do now is I'm going to use my selection tool, just as I did before, get a rectangular box. I'm going to kind of take it from halfway up the product here, and I'm just going to imagine that the bottom half of our product is using this texture. Okay, so I'm going to make my selection, click invert as I just did before, hit the delete key, Control D to deselect, and I'm going to get my rubber now, and I'm just going to rub out that corner there. I think that looks quite cool actually. But obviously I've got the lens to get rid of, so I'm going to go selection in the center of my lens, get a nice circle. Roughly, remember I'm actually only focusing on the bottom half. Hit delete, deselect. I've missed a little bit on this side, and just might use a rubber now to rub that element out. Okay, there we go. And I might just bump that opacity up a little bit so we can see it just a little bit more. Something like that. So what you can see is that I'm really adding interest to this image. What I might do now is, on my new layer, I might add a little bit of shadow. What would be quite nice is to add a little bit of shadow to that texture that I have just added. So I'm going to get my airbrush, dark grey, maybe a C8, C7, C8, and I'm just going to airbrush across that bottom layer. Okay, so just really simple bit of airbrushing there, something like that. Get my rubber, as always, rub out the bits that I don't want to see. Actually, maybe I do want that bit. Maybe I'm just going to rub it out from the outside of the product. Okay, I'll finish it up in a second. So have a go at that, add some textures, some materials, rub out the excess, put some shadow in. Okay, great, that will do for now. Tiny bit of tidying up in these corners. Okay, I don't think there's much left to do. I could go and work on this flash a little bit more. I could put maybe some material or textures between the flash and the lens. I could add in a few more highlights here and there. I've got some highlights on those edges, maybe some darker highlights on those other side. But generally, I think I'm actually pretty happy with that. I think this as an initial image gives a really clear impression of the type of product that I'm creating, although it's only in 2D. The only thing that I might do just to kind of finish it off is try and enhance the outline of the image. So layer 8, which is my outline, I might try and bring that to the top, see if I can give that a little bit more definition, and I might just go over some of those lines to make them just a little bit tidier and a bit tighter. So literally just going over the top to kind of bring those lines out so that I can really see where we're coming from. But other than that, I think I'm kind of happy enough with that. If this was part of a dynamic page where we've got a few sketches in different states, because obviously this sketch is quite well developed, let's say, I wouldn't expect all of your sketches to be this well developed, but if you have some of them that are partially developed, some of them that are fully developed like this, it really shows your your designly thinking, I guess, and the sketches that the designs that you're actually going to take forward. Okay, so I might just go around the product and enhance those lines just a little bit more to give it a bit of external definition. But otherwise, I'm happy with that. So what I'd like you to do, make sure you can use all of the tools and the skills that I've shown you today. Make sure that you can create these high impact 2D visuals, and that you can import materials, textures, images from Google. You can play with layers, and you understand highlighting and highlights and shadows. That's where I want you to be. And during this next week, I'd love you to give your own products a go, and actually create your own images just like this. If you do that, that will if you keep up week by week with the activities that we do, that will really help you when it comes nearer the submission time. So don't just leave it all to the end. Do work on each of these skills week by week. Okay, so I think just a tiny bit of tweaking. Just looking at that, it looked a bit odd there. Cool. That's all for now. Have a good week, and I'll see you next week. Thank you very much.